The rain hammered against the windows of the Ashford household as Eleanor stood frozen in the doorway of her father's study, her fingers clutching the worn fabric of her grey cotton dress. Her father's words echoed through the cold room like the tolling of funeral bells. "You will marry the Duke of Northumberland tomorrow morning. The arrangements have been made." The smell of damp wood and desperation filled the air as Eleanor's mother sat slumped in the corner, her face buried in a handkerchief that had seen too many tears. The creditors had come that morning, their threats hanging over the family like a guillotine blade. 3 generations of merchant pride reduced to this, selling their daughter like cattle at market. "Father, please," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm outside. "There must be another way." "There is no other way." Her father's fist struck the desk, sending papers scattering like autumn leaves. "The Duke has agreed to pay our debts in full. £20,000, Eleanor. Do you understand what that means? It means your brothers won't be sent to debtor's prison. It means your mother won't die in the workhouse." Eleanor's legs trembled beneath her thin dress. She had heard the whispers at the market, seen the cruel caricatures in the society papers. The Duke of Northumberland, they called him the Colossus of the North, a man so enormous that doorways had to be widened for his passage. The Tun mocked him mercilessly behind painted fans and crystal glasses. Some said he hadn't been seen at a social gathering in 5 years, hiding away in his fortress-like estate on the windswept coast. The church bells were already ringing when Eleanor's family carriage, their last remaining possession of any value, pulled up to St. Margaret's the next morning. The rain had turned to a bitter drizzle that seemed to seep through her mother's old wedding dress, hastily altered to fit Eleanor's slighter frame. She could hear the whispers, even before stepping inside. Can you imagine? The Ashford girl, given away to pay debts, like a prized mare at auction. That poor creature, better death than marriage to that monster. Eleanor's cheeks burned as she walked down the aisle, her eyes fixed on the stone floor. The church was nearly empty, only a handful of witnesses required by law and her own family, who couldn't bear to meet her gaze. Then she saw him. The Duke stood at the altar like a mountain draped in black velvet. His massive frame filled the space, making even the tall priest beside him look like a child. Eleanor's breath caught. The caricatures hadn't exaggerated. If anything, they had been kind. His face was broad and heavy, with a double chin that rested against his high collar. His breathing was audible even from where she stood, each intake of air a conscious effort. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. Green as winter moss, they held an unexpected gentleness as they met hers. For just a moment, she saw something flicker there. Regret, sorrow, understanding. "Miss Ashford," the Duke said, his voice surprisingly soft for such a large man. He extended a gloved hand toward her, and she noticed how it trembled slightly. "I know this is not the wedding you dreamed of as a girl." The priest cleared his throat impatiently, eager to complete this unseemly business. Eleanor placed her small hand in the Duke's massive one, feeling the warmth even through their gloves. The ceremony passed in a blur of Latin words she didn't understand, and vows that felt like chains forging around her heart. "You may kiss the bride," the priest announced with obvious distaste. The Duke leaned down slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. His lips barely brushed her cheek, a touch so gentle it might have been imagination. "Forgive me," he whispered, so quietly only she could hear. Outside the church, a grand carriage waited, black as midnight with the Northumberland coat of arms emblazoned in gold. The Duke helped her inside with surprising grace, his hand steady despite his bulk. As the carriage lurched forward, Eleanor caught a final glimpse of her family through the rain-streaked window. Her mother had finally looked up, tears streaming down her weathered face. Her father stood rigid, his merchant's pride shattered, but his family saved. "Your belongings will be sent to Thornfield Manor," the Duke said, settling his considerable weight across from her. The carriage groaned, but held. "I've arranged for your family's debts to be settled immediately. They won't be bothered by creditors again." Eleanor nodded, unable to trust her voice. She stared at her hands folded in her lap, the simple gold band on her finger feeling heavier than iron shackles. She was no longer Eleanor Ashford. She was the Duchess of Northumberland, wife to a man London society viewed as a grotesque curiosity, payment for £20,000 of debt. The carriage rolled through the cobbled streets toward the coast, toward a future she couldn't imagine, carrying a girl who had been sold and a man who had done the buying. Neither spoke again for the remainder of the journey, but the Duke's eyes never left her face, watching her with an expression she couldn't read, protective, pained, and holding secrets she couldn't begin to fathom. Thornfield Manor rose from the Northumberland cliffs like something born from the stone itself, its Gothic towers piercing the grey sky. The sea wind howled around the carriage as it climbed the winding path, and Eleanor pulled her thin shawl tighter, though it offered little protection against the chill that seemed to emanate from within. The Duke had dozed during the final hours of their journey, his massive frame swaying with each bump in the road. Eleanor had studied him in those quiet moments, noting the silver threads in his black hair, the way his brow furrowed even in sleep. He couldn't be more than 40, she realized, though the weight he carried seemed to age him beyond his years. As the carriage stopped, an army of servants lined the entrance, their faces carefully neutral. The Duke stirred, his green eyes immediately finding hers. "Welcome to your new home, Duchess." The title felt like mockery on his lips, though his tone held no cruelty. A footman opened the door and lowered special reinforced steps. The Duke descended first, the stairs creaking ominously, then turned to help Eleanor down. His grip was gentle but firm, and she noticed how the servants' eyes followed their every movement. "Mrs. Crawford," the Duke addressed a stern-faced woman in black bombazine, "please show her Grace to her chambers. I'm certain she wishes to rest after our journey." "This way, Your Grace," the housekeeper said, her voice clipped and efficient. Eleanor followed, but not before catching the Duke's eyes once more. "We'll dine at 8, he said softly, "if you're agreeable." She nodded, and something like relief crossed his features before he turned and walked, lumbered, toward what she assumed was his study, his cane tapping against the marble floor with each labored step. Her chambers were magnificent and unexpected. The sitting room alone was larger than her family's entire London house had been. Rich burgundy drapes framed windows overlooking the turbulent sea, and a fire crackled invitingly in the marble hearth. Through an adjoining door, she glimpsed a bedroom with a canopied bed that could have slept 5. "His Grace had these rooms specially prepared," Mrs. Crawford said, her tone softer now that they were alone. "Every comfort has been considered. Your lady's maid will arrive shortly to help you dress for dinner." Left alone, Eleanor wandered to the window, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. On the mantelpiece, she noticed a small portrait, a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. The frame was silver, carefully polished. "That was the late Duchess," a young voice said from the doorway. Eleanor turned to find a girl of perhaps 16, wearing a maid's uniform. "I'm Jenny, Your Grace. I'm to be your lady's maid if it pleases you." "The late Duchess?" Eleanor asked, her voice catching. "Died 10 years ago, Your Grace. Consumption, they say. His Grace never remarried, until now." Jenny busied herself unpacking the few belongings that had arrived. "Shall we prepare you for dinner? His Grace keeps country hours, but he's very particular about punctuality." The green silk gown Jenny selected was far finer than anything Eleanor had ever owned. As the maid tightened her stays and arranged her dark hair in an elegant chignon, Eleanor couldn't help but wonder who had chosen these clothes, ordered them made to her measurements. The dining room was cavernous, lit by hundreds of candles that couldn't quite chase away all the shadows. The Duke sat at the head of a table that could have seated 30, but a place had been set for Eleanor immediately to his right, rather than at the opposite end, as was customary. "You look lovely," he said as a footman held her chair. The compliment seemed to pain him somehow, his eyes dropping to his plate. The first course was served in silence, a delicate soup that Eleanor could barely taste past her nerves. The Duke ate slowly, methodically, as if each bite was carefully considered. She noticed his hands shake slightly as he lifted his spoon. "I owe you an explanation," he said suddenly, setting down his cutlery. "About our arrangement." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "My father explained. The debts—" "No." His voice was firm but not harsh. "About why I agreed to this, why I would—" He gestured vaguely at himself. "Subject you to this." Before Eleanor could respond, he reached into his coat and withdrew an ornate iron box no larger than a book. The metal was worked with intricate patterns, and a heavy lock secured its contents. He set it on the table between them like an offering. "Your father came to me 3 weeks ago," the Duke began, his fingers tracing the box's patterns. "But that wasn't the first time I'd heard the Ashford name." Eleanor's breath caught. The Duke's green eyes met hers, and in them she saw not the grotesque monster of society's whispers, but a man carrying the weight of untold secrets. "There are things about your family, about you, that you don't know. Things that change everything." He pushed the box slightly toward her. "But not tonight. Tonight you need rest, time to adjust. Tomorrow, if you're willing, I'll show you what's in this box. And then, Duchess, you can decide." "Decide what?" Eleanor whispered. The Duke rose laboriously from his chair, his bulk casting shadows in the candlelight. He moved toward her slowly, then did something unexpected. He knelt. Even on his knees, his eyes were nearly level with hers as she sat. "Decide if you wish to remain my wife in truth, or if you prefer to live here as my guest, protected and provided for, but free." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I won't hold you to vows made under duress, not when you learn the truth." Eleanor couldn't sleep. The wind howled around Thornfield Manor like a living thing, rattling the windows and sending shadows dancing across her bedroom walls. The iron box sat on her mantelpiece where she'd placed it after dinner, its presence as heavy as the Duke himself. At 3 in the morning, she gave up on rest and wrapped herself in a velvet robe she'd found in the wardrobe. The house was different at night, the shadows deeper, the silence more profound. She padded barefoot through the corridors, drawn by some instinct she couldn't name. A thin line of golden light escaped from beneath a door at the far end of the east wing. As she approached, she heard voices, the Duke's low rumble and another man's urgent whisper. "Your Grace, he's here. Lord Blackwood arrived an hour ago. He's demanding to see the documents." Eleanor pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding. Lord Blackwood. She knew that name. He had been among her father's creditors, the cruelest of them all. "Let him wait," the Duke replied, his voice harder than she'd ever heard it. "He has no claim here." "But, Your Grace, if he discovers the truth about the Ashford girl—" "He won't. I've made certain of that." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. What truth? What had the Duke hidden? The door opened suddenly, and she found herself face to face with a thin, nervous man in clerk's clothing. His eyes widened in shock, but the Duke appeared behind him, his massive frame filling the doorway. Eleanor. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a curse combined. "You shouldn't be here." "I couldn't sleep," she said, lifting her chin despite her fear. "Who is Lord Blackwood? What truth does he seek?" The Duke's face was unreadable in the lamplight. He dismissed the clerk with a gesture, then stood aside. "Come in. Perhaps it's time you knew." His study was unlike any room she'd ever seen. Maps covered every wall, and documents were piled on every surface. But what caught her attention was a portrait above the fireplace, the same woman from her room, but younger, standing beside a man who looked remarkably like— "My father!" Eleanor gasped. The Duke moved to his desk with surprising grace for his size, lifting a leather portfolio. "Your father and my late wife were cousins, distant but blood nonetheless." He opened the portfolio, revealing yellow documents covered in elegant script. 23 years ago, your grandfather and mine made an agreement, a marriage contract." Eleanor sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Between whom? Between their future heirs. A joining of 2 merchant families, before your grandfather lost everything and mine gained a title through service to the crown. The Duke's laugh was bitter. "Ironic, isn't it? You were promised to me before either of us was born." "But that's medieval." "It's legal." He moved toward the window, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. "Lord Blackwood knew about the contract. He thought to use it, to claim you himself if your father couldn't pay. He didn't know I held the original." Eleanor's mind reeled. "So you paid my father's debts to honor an old agreement?" "No." The Duke turned, and she saw tears tracking down his broad face. "I paid them to protect you from Blackwood. The marriage was the only way to ensure he could never touch you." A knock at the door interrupted them. "Your Grace." Mrs. Crawford's voice was urgent. "Lord Blackwood insists on being received. He's threatening to wake the entire household." The Duke's expression hardened. "Show him to the blue drawing room. We'll be there momentarily." He looked at Eleanor. "You don't have to face him. I can—" "No." Eleanor stood, surprising herself with her firmness. "I'm the Duchess of Northumberland now. I'll face him beside my husband." Something shifted in the Duke's eyes, surprise perhaps or admiration. He offered her his arm and together they walked toward the confrontation. Lord Blackwood was exactly as Eleanor remembered from that horrible morning when the creditors came, thin as a blade, with cold grey eyes and a mouth like a wound. He stood by the fireplace as if he owned it, but his expression soured when he saw them together. "Your Grace," he said, the title dripping with disdain as he looked at the Duke. "And the new Duchess, how touching." "State your business, Blackwood," the Duke said, positioning himself slightly in front of Eleanor. "I think you know why I'm here." Blackwood's eyes glittered. "The Ashford girl was promised to me. Her father agreed." "Her father owed you money, nothing more," the Duke interrupted, "and that debt has been paid in full, but not by him." Blackwood stepped closer, and Eleanor could smell his cologne, sickly sweet like rotting flowers. "The girl should have been my compensation. You had no right—" "I had every right." The Duke reached into his coat and withdrew a document. "A marriage contract, signed and witnessed 23 years ago. Would you like to challenge its authenticity in court?" Blackwood's face went white, then red. "You monstrous fool. Do you think society will accept this? The Ton already laughs at you, the obscenely fat Duke and his purchased bride." The words hung in the air like poison. Eleanor felt the Duke flinch beside her, saw his massive shoulders hunch as if trying to make himself smaller, and something inside her ignited. Not fear, not shame, but fury. "How dare you?" She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "You speak of society's acceptance while you stand in our home, making threats and demands like a common blackmailer. My husband is 10 times the man you are, Lord Blackwood. He shows more nobility in his smallest gesture than you possess in your entire being." Blackwood's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. The Duke stared at Eleanor as if seeing her for the first time. "Leave!" Eleanor commanded, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Now. And if you ever darken our doorway again, I'll ensure every drawing room in London knows exactly what kind of man you really are." Lord Blackwood left Thornfield Manor like a shadow fleeing the dawn, his carriage clattering away into the pre-dawn darkness. Eleanor stood at the window watching him go, her hands still trembling from the confrontation. Behind her, she heard the Duke's laboured breathing, felt his presence like a mountain at her back. "You called me your husband," he said softly. She turned to face him, seeing him truly for perhaps the first time. Yes, he was enormous. Society hadn't lied about that. But in his green eyes she saw something she hadn't expected. Vulnerability, deep and raw as an open wound. "Aren't you?" she asked. He laughed, but it was hollow. "In name only. We both know why you're here, Eleanor. Your family needed saving and I—" He trailed off, moving toward his desk with that surprisingly graceful gait she was beginning to recognize. "I needed to honor an old promise and protect you from men like Blackwood." "The contract," Eleanor said, moving closer. "May I see it?" He handed her the yellowed paper, and she read it by lamplight. The language was archaic but clear, a binding agreement between 2 families, sealed with wax and witnessed by a magistrate. Her finger traced her grandfather's signature. "But this doesn't explain everything," she said, looking up at him. "The iron box. You said there were things about me I didn't know." The Duke was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the desk. Outside, the first hints of dawn were breaking over the sea, painting the room in shades of gold and grey. "Your grandfather wasn't just a merchant," he finally said. "He was a keeper of secrets, a guardian, you might say." He moved to a hidden panel in the wall, pressing a sequence of hidden catches until it swung open. Inside was the iron box, along with several other documents. "He and my grandfather were part of a very old society. They protected something valuable, something that by rights belongs to you." Eleanor watched as he opened the iron box with a key from his watch chain. Inside were more papers, but also something else. A necklace of sapphires that caught the morning light like captured starlight. "Your grandmother's," the Duke said, "hidden away before the creditors could claim it, but that's not the real treasure." He lifted the papers. "These are deeds, Eleanor. Property in Scotland, investments in India, shares in shipping companies, all held in trust, all legally yours upon your marriage." Eleanor staggered, catching herself on the edge of the desk. "But my father said we had nothing—" "Your father didn't know the trust was sealed, only to be opened upon your marriage to the heir of Northumberland, to me." The Duke's smile was sad. "Your grandfather was cleverer than anyone knew. He hid your family's true wealth where no creditor could touch it. So we're wealthy beyond imagining," the Duke confirmed. "The debts your father accrued are nothing compared to what you now possess." Eleanor sank into a chair, her mind spinning. Then a thought struck her, sharp as a blade. You knew all along what I was worth." "Yes. Then why?" She looked up at him, tears burning her eyes. "Why the pretense? Why let me believe I was sold to pay debts? Why let me think—" "Because I needed to know." His voice broke. "I needed to know if you could see past this." He gestured at himself, at his massive frame. "Society calls me a monster, a grotesque. Women flee when I enter a room. I needed to know if you could find even a shred of kindness for me when you thought you had no choice." "And what did you discover?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely a whisper. The Duke knelt before her again, his movements slow and painful. Even on his knees, he was imposing, but his eyes were gentle. "I discovered that you have more courage than any woman I've ever known. You stood before Blackwood and defended me. Me, the fat Duke everyone mocks. You called me your husband with pride, not shame." Eleanor reached out, her fingers touching his face. His skin was warm, softer than she'd expected. "You're not a monster. You're the man who saved my family, who protected me from Blackwood, who gave me beautiful rooms and fine clothes and," her voice caught, "and the choice to leave if I wished." "That choice still stands," he said urgently. "Now that you know about your inheritance, you don't need me. You could have the marriage annulled, take your fortune, and find a husband who—" Eleanor silenced him by pressing her fingers to his lips. "What if I don't want another husband?" The Duke's eyes widened. "Eleanor, you don't know what you're saying. Society will always mock us. They'll whisper behind their fans about the fat duke and his purchased bride. You'll be laughed at, scorned. Then we won't go to society, Eleanor said firmly. We'll stay here, at Thornfield. We'll build our own world, away from their cruelty and judgment. You would do that? Sacrifice London, the balls, the social season? Eleanor stood, then did something that surprised them both. She cupped his broad face in both her hands. You're not the only one with secrets, Your Grace. I never wanted that life. I wanted books and quiet evenings and someone who would look at me the way you're looking at me now. The Duke's tears fell freely now. How am I looking at you? Like I'm treasure, she whispered, not payment. He caught her hands in his massive ones, holding them as if they were made of spun glass. They gave you to me as payment, he said, his voice rough with emotion. But I claim you as treasure, my treasure, if you'll have me. Eleanor leaned down and kissed him, not the brief brush of lips from their wedding, but a real kiss, deep and sure. When they parted, both were breathless. Your inheritance, he began. Is ours, Eleanor interrupted. We're married after all, in name, and if you're willing, in truth. The Duke rose to his full height, towering over her, but Eleanor felt no fear. She saw only the man who had saved her, protected her, and offered her freedom, even when it would cost him everything. There will be challenges, he warned. We'll face them together. Society will never accept us. Then we'll make our own society. He pulled her into his arms, his embrace engulfing her completely. Eleanor rested her head against his chest, hearing his heart thunder beneath the layers of fabric and flesh. This was her choice, made freely and with full knowledge. Not a sacrifice, but a salvation for both of them. 5 years later, the autumn sun streamed through the windows of Thornfield Manor's library, painting golden patterns on the Persian rugs. Eleanor sat at her escritoire, reviewing correspondence from their shipping ventures, while the Duke, her Edward, as she'd learned to call him in private, dozed in his specially reinforced chair by the fire, a book of poetry open on his lap. The past 5 years had brought changes neither of them could have imagined. Their wealth had grown exponentially under Eleanor's careful management and Edward's protective wisdom. They'd established a foundation for families trapped in debt, saving dozens from the fate that had nearly claimed the Ashfords. But more importantly, they'd found something neither had dared hope for, true companionship. Mama, Papa! The voice that shattered the peaceful afternoon belonged to their daughter, Catherine, who burst through the library doors with all the unstoppable energy of a 3-year-old. Her dark curls bounced as she ran, her little arms stretched wide. Edward woke with a start, his face breaking into the smile that only Catherine could invoke. There's my wild rose, he laughed, catching her as she climbed into his lap, with the fearlessness of a child who had only ever known love. Eleanor watched them, her heart full. The pregnancy had been difficult. The Tun had whispered cruelly about whether the grotesque Duke could even father a child. But Catherine had arrived perfect and fierce, with her mother's dark hair and her father's green eyes. Uncle Jamie is here, Catherine announced. And grandmother. Eleanor and Edward exchanged glances. Eleanor's family visited monthly now, the debts of the past forgotten in the warmth of the present. Her youngest brother James had just returned from India, where he managed one of their trading posts. Shall we receive them in the blue drawing room? Eleanor asked, rising from her desk. The very room where Blackwood tried to claim you, Edward mused. They'd heard through society gossip that Lord Blackwood had fled to America after a scandal involving forged documents. How poetic. Eleanor moved to help him rise, though he needed less assistance these days. The country air and Catherine's constant demands for garden adventures had improved his health, though he would always be a man of considerable size. Do you ever regret it? Edward asked suddenly, catching Eleanor's hand. Choosing this life? Choosing me? It was a question he asked sometimes, when the old insecurities surfaced. Eleanor's answer was always the same, but she never tired of giving it. She raised his hand to her lips, kissing each finger. You gave me freedom when you could have claimed ownership, she said. You showed me kindness when the world showed you cruelty. You loved me when you thought I could never love you back. She smiled, remembering their wedding night, when he'd revealed his secret and offered her escape. How could I regret choosing the only man who ever truly saw me? Papa is the best papa, Catherine declared, with the authority of a child who has never doubted her place in the world. Even if mean people say he's too big. And what do we say to mean people? Edward asked his daughter, though his eyes remained on Eleanor. We say, go away, Catherine shouted gleefully. And if they don't, Mama makes them. Eleanor laughed, remembering the few times they'd ventured into society. She'd become famous, or infamous, for her cutting responses to anyone who dared mock her husband. The Tun had learned that the Duchess of Northumberland had claws. They walked together toward the blue drawing room. Catherine riding on Edward's shoulders, despite Mrs. Crawford's horrified protests about propriety. Through the windows, Eleanor could see the sea, calm today beneath the autumn sun. Thornfield had become what she'd promised, their own world, away from society's cruelty. "Your Grace," James called out as they entered, sketching a playful bow. "Still terrorizing Lord Blackwood's memory, I hear." "Only when necessary," Eleanor replied, embracing her brother. Her mother sat by the window, looking healthier than she had in years. The comfort and security Eleanor provided had erased the lines of worry that poverty had etched. "We've brought news from London," her mother said, her eyes twinkling. "The Queen herself has heard of your charitable foundation. There's talk of a royal commendation." Edward snorted. "The same society that mocked us now wants to honor us. Let them," Eleanor said, settling beside him on the reinforced settee, Catherine sprawling across both their laps. "We'll accept their commendation and use it to help more families, but we won't forget who stood by us when the world laughed." As the afternoon wore on, filled with family laughter and Catherine's adventures, Eleanor reflected on the strange path that had brought them here. She'd been given to an obese duke as payment for debt, society had whispered. But the truth was far different. She'd been given a chance at real love, with a man whose greatest secret wasn't his wealth or her inheritance. It was his heart, as vast and generous as his frame. He'd saved her from Blackwood, from poverty, from a life of being traded and sold. But more than that, he'd saved her from a life without choice. And in return, she'd saved him from something worse than mockery, from believing he deserved it. That night, after the family had departed and Catherine was asleep, Eleanor and Edward stood on their bedroom balcony, watching the moon rise over the sea. His arm encircled her, warm and protective as always. "They gave you to me as payment," he murmured into her hair, repeating the words that had become their private devotion. "But you claimed me as treasure," she finished, turning in his arms. "My treasure," he agreed, and kissed her beneath the stars while the sea sang its ancient song, and Thornfield stood strong against the night, protecting the unlikely love that flourished within its walls. If this tale touched your heart, imagine the hidden chapters waiting for you. As a cherished member of our Victorian Love Stories Club, you'll unlock secret romances, exclusive tales, and noble rewards crafted just for you. Join our circle of devoted readers and listeners, and let the manor doors open wider for you. Explore the privileges awaiting in our channel membership. Your place in our noble family is ready. What most touched or surprised you in this story? Would you like to hear more stories of unlikely love and hidden secrets from the Victorian era? Please like, subscribe, and share this with someone who appreciates a good romance. Thank you so deeply for spending this time with us. Another equally moving story will be suggested on your screen shortly.